The Autumn Purge, Margaret had always been meticulous about seasonal transitions. Each September, like clockwork, she would begin the ritual of preparing her Victorian home for autumn's embrace. The summer clutter needed clearing, the heavy curtains required hanging, and every corner demanded inspection. This year, however, something felt different about the process, something that made her fingers tremble as she reached for the first storage box. The morning light filtered through dusty windows as she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The space smelled of mothballs and forgotten time, filled with boxes labeled in her own careful handwriting. Summer linens, beach accessories, warm weather clothes. She had always prided herself on organization, on knowing exactly where everything belonged. But today, among the familiar containers, she discovered a box she didn't remember packing. The cardboard was newer than the others, unmarked except for a single word scrawled in handwriting that looked almost like hers, but not quite. Autumn. Margaret stared at the unfamiliar script, her heart beginning to race. She lived alone. She had packed everything herself. Yet here was evidence of someone else's presence in her most private space. With trembling hands, she opened the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were items that belonged in her home but shouldn't exist. A photograph of her living room, but with furniture arranged differently than she remembered. Curtains in a pattern she'd never chosen, hanging in windows that looked like hers but somehow weren't. A journal filled with her own handwriting, describing autumn preparations she had no memory of making. The entries spoke of cleaning rituals that grew increasingly obsessive, of decluttering that became compulsive, of organizing that transformed into something darker. The handwriting grew more erratic with each page, describing the need to prepare the space, to make room for what's coming, to clear away everything that doesn't belong. Margaret's hands shook as she read her own words describing the removal of summer memories, the systematic elimination of anything that spoke of warmth or light. The journal detailed a methodical process of creating space not for cozy autumn comfort, but for something else entirely, something that required emptiness. She dropped the journal and backed away from the box, but her eyes caught something else. At the bottom, wrapped in what looked like her grandmother's lace doilies, were small glass jars. Each one was labeled with dates from previous autumns, and each contained what appeared to be ... nothing. Empty air, sealed and preserved. But as Margaret lifted one jar to the light, she realized it wasn't empty at all. Inside, barely visible, something moved. A shadow that shouldn't exist in a sealed container. A darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The jar slipped from her fingers, shattering on the attic floor. The sound echoed through the house. But what followed was worse, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking words in her own voice. Time to organize, time to prepare, time to prepare, time to make space. Margaret ran from the attic, but the whispers followed her down the stairs. In her living room, she noticed things she hadn't seen before. The furniture had shifted slightly. The autumn decorations she thought she'd placed yesterday were arranged differently. The cozy throw pillows she'd carefully positioned now formed patterns that hurt to look at directly. She grabbed her phone to call someone, anyone, but stopped when she saw her recent calls. Numbers she didn't recognize, all with the same time stamp, 3:33 a.m. When had she made these calls? What had she said in the dark hours? She couldn't remember. The house around her seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each of her panicked breaths. The autumn preparations she'd been so proud of now felt like a trap she'd built for herself. Every organized closet, every decluttered space, every cozy corner had been arranged not for comfort, but for something else's convenience. As evening approached, Margaret found herself moving through her home with mechanical precision, adjusting decorations, rearranging furniture, preparing spaces according to instructions she couldn't remember receiving. Her hands worked independently of her will, creating perfect autumn tableaux, while her mind screamed in protest. The last thing she remembered clearly was looking in her hallway mirror and seeing her reflection, organizing a room behind her room that didn't exist in her house. In the mirror, her other self turned and smiled, holding another glass jar, this one glowing with captured light. When the neighbors found Margaret's house 3 days later, it was perfectly organized for autumn. Every surface gleamed, every decoration placed with mathematical precision. The only thing missing was Margaret herself, though they did find a new jar in the attic, carefully labeled with the current date, containing what appeared to be empty air that somehow cast a shadow. The house went up for sale that winter, but every autumn since, neighbors report seeing lights in the windows and the silhouette of someone preparing the space, organizing and cleaning with endless, methodical devotion.